Thank you for joining us for the December morning GATE Equity webinar, where we explore topics related to equity and graduation success. Some housekeeping to think about. This webinar is recorded and it'll be posted in the next couple of weeks. Our PowerPoint is currently posted on the OSPI GATE Equity webinar page, so if you want to follow along, that link is going to come across in the chat in just a second. Also, we'd like to ask that you definitely direct those questions to the Q&A, not the chat, so we can more easily make sure that we answer your questions and are responding to you. I'm Kefi Andersen, OSPI Graduation Equity Program Supervisor, and today's topic is 9th Graders on Track, Insights from Chicago Freshman Success Institute. We chose this topic because OSPI has invested in having a team go to the University of Chicago's Freshman Success Institute to learn more about the work happening with the Network for College Success. They've done extensive research on Freshmen on Track and are providing training to schools to focus on track because it predicts graduation so strongly. Today's webinar will zero in on their systems approach. And we chose this topic because it complements the Washington work that's been done on multi-tiered systems of support, MTSS, and the graduation equity work, where we're really looking at the systems in place for schools who have a high graduation rate with many low-income students and a low gap between low-income and non-low-income students. If you're a small school, you might start thinking that the work happening in Chicago may not apply to you because it's in that urban setting, but we want to emphasize that using teams and data purposefully is a really high leverage strategy, whether you're a team of 4 or 25. I'm joined today by Krissy Johnson. I'm so glad you're here, Krissy. She's our OSPI Attendance Program Supervisor, and she attended the Freshman Success Institute with me. We were also joined by Marissa Rathbone, Director of Operations for the Learning and Teaching Department at OSPI. So shout out to you, Marissa. Today, Marissa is doing some important work of acting as our 9th grade ambassador, listening in with the OSPI directors. So we're glad you're listening. At OSPI, our vision is that all students are prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagements. And this GATE webinar is brought to you through the Office of System and School Improvement. My goal for today is to convince you that Freshmen on Track is a vital focus point for our students. To do this, Krissy and I are going to talk a little bit about our experiences in Chicago and what we learned, and take some time to get you familiar with some strategies for team protocols, data use, and a framework to structure those roles. We also want to provide you with some resources and tools and get you thinking about the implications for your work. So I'm going to hand it off to Krissy to tell you a little bit more about why 9th grade on track.
Good morning. One of the most powerful elements of the work we witnessed in Chicago was their laser-like focus on 9th grade on track. So we wanted to highlight the importance of the research in why they are and why we would like to focus on 9th grade on track. So the research is clear that 9th grade is a pivotal year for student success. The research shows that a 9th grader that is a 9th grader who is on track, is 3.5 times more likely to graduate from high school than an off-track student. It's been shown to be a stronger predictor of test scores and demographics, including poverty and race and ethnicity. And because of this predictive power of 9th grade on track, focusing on this metric really provides an excellent place to start because it is such a high leverage measure. So it really helps focus the work and keep us on track. 9th grade success is one of our state school quality and student success measures, our SQSS measures under ESSA. The other measures include regular attendance and dual credit completion. And each of these measures were selected because of their research base that shows that they are high impact early warning indicators. The analysis represented on this slide was conducted by OSPI and includes data on Washington State's class of 2017. And what this data show is that starting on the left-hand side of the slide, 26% of students that did not meet any of the SQSS measures graduated. 46% of students that met one of the SQSS measures graduated. Moving on all the way to the right, students that met all of the SQSS measures had a 96% graduation rate. I'll give you a second to just let that sink in, because for our team, this is very powerful data and very persuasive about the power of not just one of these indicators, but the three of these indicators together. We also saw in the analysis that there were equally high graduation rates across various student groups. So again, just how powerful it is by looking at the three of these measures together in terms of increasing students' graduation rates. Moving on to how we define ninth grade success. Our SQSS ninth grade success measure includes all first-time ninth graders that earned all the credits they attempted, and it does not include withdrawals. Our state data for 2017 shows that 73% of Washington students were on track. However, on the flip side, that means that 27% of our students were not on track, which means that they are unlikely to graduate. This shows our the trend in our state on track data. And what we can see is that it's incrementally going up, but we do see disparities between some of our student groups. So some of the student groups that struggle the most include students with disabilities, Native Hawaiian students, English learners, and American Indian and Alaskan Native students. And just a reminder, what this means is that 1 in 4 students failed a course. If you would like to see your local data on ninth grade on track, or any of the ESSA measures, the recently revamped report card is a great place to start. In the report card, you will find the link to the Washington School Improvement Framework that gives a school report card for each of the ESSA measures. And we will take a break by asking you to respond to the following poll. How familiar are you with ninth grade on track? A, I'm an expert. B, I feel like I know enough to help my staff. C, I've never heard about it before. We'll give you a little more time to respond.
Okay.
And then I'll hand it over to Kefi.
So from our polling results, it looks like out there's not a lot of experts, but people know enough to help their staff. And there's some people who've never heard of it before, and that's okay. We're gonna kind of get you in on the ground level so that you can have some idea of what's going on. So before we get into what we learned exactly, I wanted to preface why we went to Chicago. The University of Chicago has done so much research on schools, and they mobilize that research through the Network for College Success. They link their research with school practitioners, and they're trying to build capacity for freshman success teams. Professional learning networks are part of that, and they have other supports that are making a huge difference in these schools. So what we're sharing with you today is just a little bit of it. There's so much more to check out. Chicago Public Schools is characterized by high poverty urban high schools. So keep in mind that their systematic approach can easily be applied to smaller schools. They've maintained a lot of success through the years. They've been working on Freshmen on Track for over 10 years. And since 2006, their on-track rate went from 61% to 85% through this model. And they've maintained that success through leadership changes and all kinds of adversity. So it's been a good focus measure for them. the schools that they worked with could see a correlation between on-track and graduation. So as you can see, they're pretty closely related over time. So looking at that on-track rate in light blue, and then the graduation rate in dark blue. And because it's a sustained measure, they have data going back pretty far to look at how it's been going. So while we were there, one of the concepts that they introduced to us was the idea of parsimony. And parsimony is the idea that the simplest answer is usually the one that people go to. It's the easiest answer, right? So if we cut down on all of the noise and we get to the highest leverage practices, it's much easier to focus. There's a ton of other measures that contribute to on track, but they're not as strong of an indicator. So, and as you work on track, you're going to find those underlying factors. So, and as you're chipping away at it, you might notice, oh, this is an attendance thing, or we need to look at our learning standards. But you have to do that analysis to really know what those things are. Freshman on track is 80% predictive. So thinking about that, it's a really good focus point. So if you want to check in, are our interventions making a dent in it over time? It's a really good baseline way to measure if it's making a difference. So what changes between 8th and 9th grade for students? We know that 9th grade transition is actually a really tough time for students. And we see a lot of students disengage from school at that point. Between 8th and 9th grade for attendance, we see unexcused absences quadruple. And that attendance makes a big difference. Monitoring support also changes. So thinking about how students are connecting with their teachers. Do they have as much oversight? And do they have that strong relationship with their teachers? That changes a lot in high school because high school students have a lot of pressure on them to act like adults, right? And so the parent support isn't as much encouraged. It's actually kind of discouraged, like, we don't want you to be a helicopter parent. We want you to let them figure this out for themselves. We want them to be more like adults, right? So safety also changes between 8th and 9th grade. Some students fear different things at school. Getting to school can be an issue. And their study habits and academic effort changes. And that's due to kind of that developmental piece of adolescence where they're getting much more concerned with their peer groups and what's happening there. The research that they did in Chicago, and these are based on Chicago's research, they show that the academic demand does not really change. So the differences, the huge differences between 8th and 9th grade, they are kind of reflective of these things. But a lot of it has to do with brain development, right? So thinking about adolescent brain development, there's kind of a crossroads for students going into 9th grade. They have a piece of adulthood, so they're really excited to be independent. They want to do it all by themselves. They want to hang out with their friends. But they don't necessarily have the experience to know when too much independence is going to get them into trouble, like taking on too big of a project by themselves. And they're also very focused on themselves. So thinking about who am I? What's my context? What's my identity? What do I stand for? What are my values? And where do I belong? How do I interact with my peers? Who do they think I am? And there's this piece of open mindset as well. So students at this point, because they are kind of in that identity finding phase, they're also thinking about, what do other people think of me? And they're very open to those opinions. So that kind of brings me to my next point. There is a myth that failure can be motivation. And the experience of that failure is actually really damaging to your identity. So thinking about teachers need to give the impression that when they give an F, that they're saying, high school's serious, you're about to be an adult, you got to work hard, you got to show your independence, and we can't just hold your hand, right? You gotta step it up. But there has to be a kind of a balance there where they can still get support. And so what it actually feels like when you fail a course, which is a horrible experience for anybody who has not experienced that before. High school's impossible. I'm not smart enough to do this work. Why should I even try? And no one wants to help me. And some of them get the idea that they don't belong in the community of learners, and that is a disengagement point for school. There is this idea of failing forward and resilience that we have out in the community, and that's great. But it is something to think about in terms of you got to have those formative places where you can course correct. Actually getting the F is pretty awful. So some other research that they shared with us is that creating successful context for early adolescents, whether inside or outside of schools, would require us to meet their developmental needs for increasing independence from adult control. So extended interaction with peers, exploration with things that they have an interest in, opportunities to engage in increasingly complex forms of thinking, communicating, and problem solving. So we want to think about are the kinds of tasks that we're giving students honoring these developmental needs. Things like project teams, internships, apprenticeships, project-based learning. There's a lot of different approaches that might be really appropriate for this age group. So when we went, we kind of took a large, big picture focus, and we're like, well, how did you go about this monumental task? And the Network for College Success, they kind of have it planned out for us. So they have a cycle. There's always people who are holdouts whenever something new comes along. So the first thing that they did was a communications campaign, and they wanted to share the research with people to get that buy-in, that this wasn't just going to be another thing, this was going to be a sustained, and that this work is the right work to focus on to get that high leverage point because it is so predictive. They also developed teams, so thinking about school teams and making sure that people understood the roles and the protocols for being on teams. And then they trained team leaders and principals and data managers and teacher teams so that they could do this work without the help of Network for College Success, that it could live on in their buildings. They also train them how to use data for improvement, so the right data to move forward. And then they also looked at professional learning networks. So they have all these schools who are doing great things, but they don't necessarily have a chance to interact with one another. So creating those professional learning networks so that they can cross-pollinate those great ideas and also talk through challenges, like because my great idea could be something helpful to you, and so on. And then as they're looking for the next great idea, they're also re-engaging in that research and going through that cycle of inquiry together. So a lot of their strategies that they want us to employ, that we want to talk about today, are using team protocols. So there's teams that they would like to have in place. There's specific data that you can look at in those meetings. And they have a framework as a guide to really show the roles and responsibilities of those people. And Krissy's going to tell us a little bit more about what those teams do.
Thanks, Kefi. We know that teams are not a new concept, but what was remarkable to us about the work in Chicago was the way in which the teams operated and the support that they were provided. And that's what we want to highlight here. So our three biggest takeaways from their teamwork are that, one, they committed to meeting regularly. They followed established protocols, and those protocols included setting norms, and they used those norms to keep the work focused on improving outcomes for kids. Second, they intentionally analyzed and prepared data prior to their meetings. They identified what the topic of the meeting should be through that data analysis and which students should be the focus of their attention. Time was not spent during the meetings delving into a big spreadsheet and making sense of data in that way. And then third, they brought in student voice. So this could include a brief survey of a student. For example, the team might let a student know that they were going to be talking about them and having a conversation to support them better. And so they would ask the student to provide some additional information about, for instance, which classes were most engaging to them, which ones they enjoyed the most. And so to get down into the how a little bit more, these are some of the components of what made their team so successful. So first of all, they had the right people at the table, and those included freshman teachers, counselors. They definitely had administrators present, although often were not contributors to the meeting. They were more there as confirmation that leadership was supporting this effort, and they also had a freshman success or graduation specialist. Moving on to the second box, the principal and team lead would review the data in advance in preparation for the meeting, and then during the meeting itself, teams focused on students that needed high tier 1 or low tier 2 support, knowing that these strategies discussed and explored among the teachers, if they worked, would then be applicable to all of their students. There were assigned staff, like the graduation specialist, that would do the follow-up with the student and the staff involved to make sure that the items identified in the meeting were followed through on. And then lastly, the teams met regularly, once a week or once every 2 weeks. This list represents the types of teams that might engage in this work. Now, not every school has each of these teams. In Chicago, the freshman success model resulted in the creation, in particular, of those freshman success teams, the second from the bottom. This served as the 9th grade level team. In addition, I'd like to highlight the care team, the very last line there. So there was critical support through the care team that would supplement the tier 1, tier 2 work of the freshman success teams. And the care team would engage in supporting students in need of tier 2 or tier 3 supports, let's say for attendance or behavior. So if you're a small school and you're looking at this list, you might feel overwhelmed. But I think the point here is that the functions, the duties outlined here don't have to happen in these specific teams. This kind of gives you an outline of some of the duties that teams should accomplish, and you might have 1 or 2 teams that would accomplish some of these duties. And then lastly, I want to introduce you to the Freshman Success Framework. So this is one of the pillars of their work that outlines both the ways of being and the ways of doing. The ways of being have been broken out in the first 3 buckets here. And they've captured all of this work in a beautiful 1-page document that the snapshot down on the bottom right. And I'd like to highlight that the framework has goals for the success model that keep them on track. The framework includes guiding beliefs for student success that help ground the adults in why we are doing this work. And the framework also highlights the results that we want to see in the school culture that include data-informed decision-making and positive working relationships among staff, student, and families. And then I think, for me most powerfully, what is so elegant about the framework is the roles and responsibilities for the principal, team lead, and the success team are clearly delineated in the different buckets of work, such as setting the conditions, how do we implement these teams, what does the communication look like, and what does instruction look like. So I encourage you to follow this link in order to view the Freshman Success Framework document.
And Ronnie's put that in the chat for us too.
Oh, great. Kefi, would you like to take over for the success team in action?
Sure. So we want to share with you a little bit of video from that we were offered while we were there. Let's see if it works. Big. And what this video shows is how these freshman success teams work in the context of their model. And we just want to share a couple of little clips of the video. We're not going to watch the whole thing, of course. And just to show you, this team meeting is very different and is strengths-based. So check it out. So in this portion of the video, I think you can notice that they have really clearly set out their norms, and that's their grounding in the culture. So thinking about that, and if you notice this beautiful data reports, they're so cool to have all that information in front of you ahead of time.
If you just shared your screen for that program, it's only going to show that program.
Sorry, folks, we were just made aware that you were not able to see the video. Were folks able to hear? Could you confirm in the chat if you were able to hear the content of the video?
No.
We can't hear your content.
Oh, sorry
Okay.
about that, everybody. Okay. Let's see.
Maybe let's just, do you want to move on? Okay.
You can skip it. Post the link for that.
Yeah, let's post the link for it and you can take a look. In this video, what we wanted you to see is that they were very purposeful about norms. And so, yep. So they set norms and they're kind of grounding their culture in that. And they have these beautiful data reports that show for the whole grade how they're doing, depending on how the students are ranked into categories. And then they're also going to be looking at two specific students. So as Krissy was talking about the teams, they've identified those students ahead of time. They're high tier 1, tier 2 students who they're representative of something that a lot of the teachers are facing, like cell phones, right? And so thinking about if we as a team can get on the same page for what intervention we want to use, that's applicable to other students. And then at the end of the meeting, so what they've done is they've taken 2 teams of teachers, the 9th grade teachers, to talk about those students. And then at the end, they share what they're going to do as a result, and they document what that is. And then, and someone will follow up with that student to make sure that they know that this is what happened as a result of our meeting, and this is our plan. So I want to talk a little bit about preparing data. And for those of you who are really new to Freshman on Track, this might be a little bit in the weeds, but for people who've been working on it for a little while, who have a little bit of base knowledge, I thought that this was really useful information for how to be a little bit more purposeful about who you talk about. So one strategy that they showed us was that they would give students a weekly bag report. And a bag report shows your behavior, your attendance, and grades. And they say, you know, if you can predict it, you can prevent it. So showing students this weekly report is a really great strategy to up their advocacy for themselves. It includes reflective questions at the beginning, like, do my grades represent my true ability? Do my actions reflect the real me? Is that what am I doing to contribute to a safe and respectful school climate? So these questions are really just kind of a nice reflective practice for students. And they outline all of the data rates for things like the number of office discipline referrals and your attendance rate. And if you'll notice, these are our early warning indicators. So they're the high leverage data points. And it puts it back on the student. So it asks them who to talk to. It gives them that direction. So if you're wondering about your attendance, like, oh, wow, that doesn't seem right, then you can go and talk to that teacher or the attendance person. So this data point actually made me wonder a lot about, I wonder how many schools are actually giving students weekly reports on behavior, attendance, and grades. So I'm going to send this poll out to you, and we're going to look at our chat box and try to answer questions if people have questions also.
And Kefi, didn't you say that when Chicago instituted these bag reports, they weren't able to say it was causal, but they saw a big increase in their on-track rates?
Yeah, so that was actually a big turning point, because a few years earlier they had provided data systems to the schools that they were working with, but once they made the students aware, it changed the numbers a lot. So
do I need to do it? Or if it's just no, that's to accept it. This is just FYI. Okay.
Okay, we're gonna share the results. It looks like most people are not doing this, but we want this, we don't have the technology. We want this, we don't have time. Those are understandable things. Those are, yeah.
So is this basically the list?
And thank you for sharing with us. We like to see results to work on. So I want to talk a little bit about defining risk and opportunity data. So another strategy that they used for the University of Chicago was looking at 8th grade GPA and attendance. So this is that predictive quality again. So being able to look at students who had low attendance or low GPA and kind of the crisscross of that. You can pull those students in for supports over the summer before they even get there. You can get really personalized by inviting them to join sports and to get really involved in the school with clubs, maybe assigning them a mentor and having them get to know that mentor before they even arrive on day one. And knowing who those kids are and what they're going to need before day one is really helpful. So you can also, in this yellow category here, those are opportunity students, right? So the yellow and the green. So if you only have one failing course, teachers can make a big impact on students by really getting into that space with them and pushing them up to the next level with just a little bit of support. And they're more likely to make an impact on the students who just need that little bump to move up.
And do they age out or?
And so the red, you kind of want to think about this in terms of team as well. So thinking about those students who need the most help, wraparound services, those students are not the ones that you want your teacher team to be talking about, because they can really get stuck down in the weeds and they don't necessarily have the expertise to help those students. But teachers can help the students who just need a little help with things like a cell phone. So in the middle there, where they're just struggling a little bit with those classroom behaviors, I think that's a higher leverage point. And one piece of research that they shared with us was that you're most likely to have the impact on students identified in Tier 2. During their professional learning network, they also have during professional learning networks, they looked at performance management reports. So thinking about over time, each month, how are the students doing who we identified as high risk, and are we making a difference in the category that they are part of? So thinking about, have they shifted into vulnerable? Are they shifting into the 3.0 B's or better? And B's or better was a category that made a big difference for the mindset of the school. So a lot of schools started off with the goal of 9th grade, and that's where you had to start. So thinking about some schools, most schools have to start thinking about, like, at least for the most part, on track. And then once you get to the next level, once most kids are on track, you can change it up to be B's or better. And B's or better is important because it's predictive of college success. So thinking about the students who end high school with a 3.0 or higher are, I think it's over 90% actually of likelihood of also graduating college. So you can see your effort over time, and you can also catch the students who are falling fast. So being able to see someone was doing really well in 8th grade and they're really high grades, they're shifting down into that some F's category. That's a student you want to intervene with right away. So did you want to talk about this one? You have a lot of notes, Krissy. But for our trip to Chicago, we had several other Washington districts attend also. And so Highline School District was there, and so was Federal Way and Evergreen and Chelan. So we're really excited for next steps with these districts, and we're hoping to get them on a webinar to you soon to talk about the experience and how they're using the school information. And Krissy, do you want to talk a little bit about locations?
Absolutely. So we covered a lot of content, and I just want to take a second to reflect on the key elements of this work that we feel are really powerful and interesting for us to consider here in Washington. And those include effective teaming, actionable data, team protocols and norms. All of those three things are key pillars of an MTSS system, and have value and implications not only for high schools, but elementary schools and middle schools, as we all think about what does on track look like for my kids. You know, we have a role to play here at OSPI and in the ESDs and at school districts in terms of how do we support this work at the building level. Anything else you'd like to add, Kefi?
We did get a question in, and someone was asking about who distributed the bag reports. So I believe they're prepared by the administration and the data team, and they have like a data program that spits them out. And so I'm not sure if it was a first period teacher or an advisory teacher, but that would make a lot of sense. So if you're interested in sharing a little bit more in the chat, we're curious about what's already working and your ideas for where you want to go next. We also, we'd love to see a little bit more about what's your major takeaway for the webinar. If there's anything that you'd like to share with us, we always like to know where we got it right and where we missed the mark. So we are going to take a couple minutes to talk about resources. There is the Freshman on Track Toolkit, which that framework for freshman success that Krissy was talking about is a part of that. And it's kind of broken down into larger categories, but this is a very comprehensive toolkit. And Ronnie's a link for that in the chat as well. So so understanding research and applying data is one section of that. And then, so if you'd like to think about how you can share this information out in your community with parents and students, that section is great. When they're preparing to lead, you have the data system in place to distribute something like a bag report, thinking about what are the things that you need to have to get started. And then setting conditions for success. Who are your team leaders going to be, and how are they going to interact in this, and how can you grow capacity on your staff? And what does it actually look like to implement those school-based teams? So they have so many great resources, including videos and research articles and posters, and I definitely would love for everybody to check that out. It is so helpful to see all of that great stuff. Another option for resources, the Ninth Graders on Track page on OSPI's website has more good stuff for you as well. And that includes a system improvement guide. So at OSPI, we've been partnering with Ed Northwest, and we created these systems guides for all of the SQSS measures, including attendance and dual credit and Ninth Grade on Track. So they're a really great place to get started with your staff. And we're going to put our evaluation in the chat as a link as well. We'd love to know what you thought of our webinar, and we're going to be answering questions. Coming up this afternoon, we have another webinar, and this is really great if you're working with students with disabilities, and we recognize that many of our schools have been identified as struggling with students with disabilities and being able to support them. So this is a great opportunity to learn from ESD 113's Teacher of the Year, Melissa Charette. She's going to be talking about building inclusion into culture and her peer mentoring program that she set up for her students with disabilities to help them transition to the high school. And next month, we're going to be talking about mentoring. So in January, we'll have a Mentoring 101, that continuum of mentoring, as well as a Culturally Responsive Connections Mentoring 201 session. And if you liked our images, most of them come from the Noun Project and Canva. And we're going to stick around and answer questions for a little bit. And thank you so much for joining us for GATE Equity Webinar. And thank you, Krissy, for presenting with me.
Thanks, everyone.